Today, Uruk's ruins bake under Iraq's scorching desert sun, its crumbling mud bricks whispering of a forgotten past. But rewind 6,000 years, and Uruk was a vibrant metropolis, nestled in lush marshlands, fringed with palm groves, and fed by the mighty Euphrates. Once home to over 50,000 people, likely the world's largest city in its time, this ancient powerhouse birthed the legend of Gilgamesh, a near-mythical king whose epic quests for immortality still captivate us today. Uruk wasn't just a city. It was a cradle of civilization, pioneering writing, stone architecture, the towering ziggurat, and the cylinder seal, Mesopotamia's signature for marking property and power. Let's step back into the sands of Uruk and bring its story back to life. The name Uruk likely derives from either Erek, meaning long in Aramic, or Al-Arak, an Arabic term meaning the shore, bank, or edge, reflecting the region's geographical setting. Uruk was located in southern Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia meaning the land between rivers, situated east of the modern Euphrates riverbed on a now dry ancient river channel in Iraq's Muthanna's governorate, located 30 kilometers east of the modern city of Samarwa. Before the ancient city of Uruk became one of the world's first true cities, it was born from the union of two distinct settlements, Calabar and Iana. These were not just villages, but vibrant centers of early Sumerian life, each with its own sacred identity nestled along the ancient Euphrates River. Both settlements trace their origins to the earlier Ubaid culture, a foundational civilization that introduced advanced agricultural practices and irrigation systems to southern Mesopotamia. The Ubaid people also established a hierarchical society with a ruling class of priests and administrators who oversaw labor, trade, and religious ceremonies, while the majority of the population worked as farmers, herders, and fishermen. Thanks to Mesopotamia's strategic location, the Ubaid culture became a hub of early long-distance trade. They maintained connections with distant regions such as the Persian Gulf, the Indus Valley, and the Arabian Peninsula, exchanging goods like textiles, pottery, and precious metals, laying the groundwork for the economic complexity that would later flourish in Uruk. Calabar, one of the oldest settlements in Sumer, dating back to around 5000 BC, was a place of spiritual significance. At its heart stood a massive terrace crowned by a temple dedicated to Anu, the Sumerian sky god. This elevated sanctuary, later known as the Anu district, was a focal point of worship and community life. It was a place where the heavens met the earth, and its people organized their lives around this sacred core. Not too far away, Iana emerged as a dynamic hub dedicated to Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. Unlike Calabar's elevated temple, Iana was a bustling complex of buildings, including workshops and spaces for ritual and trade, all enclosed by a mysterious wall. Was this wall for defense, ceremony, or to set Iana's sacred space apart? We don't know for sure, but it hints at Iana's unique status. By around 4000 BC, Iana was already a cradle of innovation, where the earliest forms of writing, Cuneiform, began to take shape on clay tablets, marking the dawn of recorded history. It's worth mentioning that around this time, about 4000 BC, the Persian Gulf's shoreline was approximately 80 kilometers northwest of its current position, with the Tigris and Euphrates forming a distinct delta. This created a fertile, marshy wetland around Uruk, ideal for extensive agriculture. Calabar and Iana, initially separate communities on elevated grounds near the Euphrates, gradually merged into a single settlement. This unification, built on Ubaid's foundations, marked the emergence of urban life in Mesopotamia and the development of Uruk and Sumerian civilization. After the Ubaid period, the transition to the Uruk period marked a transformative phase in southern Mesopotamia, during which Uruk emerged as one of the world's first cities. This shift was built on the Ubaid culture's foundations: agriculture, irrigation, proto-urban settlements and social hierarchy, and was driven by significant social, economic, and technological developments. The first king of Uruk, according to the Sumerian king list, was Meshki-Ang-Ashur, son of the sun god Utu, and was said to have reigned for 324 years. He was the father of Enmerkar, who is credited with the founding and building the city of Uruk in 4500 BC, and who then reigned for 420 years. The Uruk period is typically divided into early, middle, and late phases, corresponding to the archaeological levels and changes in material culture, architecture, and social complexity. The exact dates vary slightly by site and scholar, but the following is a widely accepted framework. The early Uruk period, from 4000 to 3500 BC, the middle Uruk period, from 3500 to 3300 BC, and the late Uruk period, from 3300 to 3100 BC. Uruk's prominence was succeeded by the Jemdet Nasser period from 3100 to 2900 BC, which is generally considered its peak, with an estimated 50,000 to even estimates up to 80,000 people living in Uruk, almost certainly the largest city in the world in its time, and subsequently the early dynastic period from 2900 to 2350 BC. What then followed was a succession of dynasties and periods marked by conquerors and sackings, and also by shifting political, cultural, and social developments. During the Uruk period, agriculture was the backbone of the Sumerian city of Uruk's transformation into one of the world's earliest and most significant urban centers. The farming god, Ninurta, was worshipped to help bring good harvest. In the earliest records, he is a god of agriculture and healing who cures humans of sickness and releases them from the power of demons. In later times, as Mesopotamia grew more militarized, he became a warrior deity, though he retained many of his earlier agricultural attributes. Uruk leveraged its fertile environment and innovative agricultural practices to support a growing population and fuel economic complexity. The fertile floodplains of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers provided rich alluvial soil, but the region's arid climate and unpredictable flooding required sophisticated water management. The Uruk people developed complex irrigation systems, including canals, levees, and reservoirs to control water distribution for crops. They used the natural landscape to their advantage, including building high river levees to allow water to flow by gravity and constructing crevice splays to distribute water across floodplains. They also dug out large storage basins and canals to link these basins to networks of ditches that supplied fields with water. Canals were dug by hand by laborers, using tools like shovels and baskets to move the excavated earth. These systems allowed year-round farming, increased arable land, and mitigated flood risks, enabling surplus production. Primary crops included barley, wheat, dates, figs, and legumes. Barley was especially important due to its resilience and versatility. It was used for bread, fodder, and beer, which they loved so much they had a goddess of beer named Ninkasi who they worshipped. Domesticated animals like sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs provided meat, milk, wool, and labor for plowing, further supporting agricultural output. Irrigation and improved farming techniques, such as plowing and crop rotation, a method where different crops are grown in the same field in a sequence of growing seasons, generated significant food surpluses and allowed Uruk to sustain a larger population, including non-farming specialists like craftsmen, priests, and administrators. Surpluses were stored in communal granaries, managed by emerging institutions like temples, which played a central role in economic organization. Agriculture required coordinated labor for tasks like canal maintenance and harvesting. This led to the development of administrative systems, with elites and temple officials overseeing labor and resource distribution. The use of clay tokens and early writing systems, called proto-Cuneiform, emerged to track agricultural production, trade, and storage, marking a key step towards literacy and bureaucracy. In addition to grains and domestic animals, people had plenty of fish and fowl from the rivers and marshes. Fish names from ancient texts have identified about 324 names referring to about 90 species, including some marine fish. Their diets included a variety of fish, both freshwater and saltwater. Tuna, carp, eel, bream, and koi were common. They used various methods for fishing, employing stationary nets, seine nets, and cast nets, and possibly used reed rafts and boats to encircle fish shoals. Cuneiform texts also indicate that they used spears and might have caught fish directly in shallow waters. As people learnt to farm, they also changed their clothing from wild animal skins to what they could make with their domesticated animals and plants. In Uruk, this meant that most people wore woolen garments made from the fleece of their sheep, even in hot weather. Only the elite could wear linen, a textile made from the fibers of flax plants, because the process of making it took much longer than weaving or knitting wool. Growing demand for materials, both practical and luxurious, helped fuel Uruk's need for trade. Uruk's trade network stretched far beyond the city walls, reaching across Mesopotamia and into distant lands. These connections were made possible through an intricate web of ravine, overland, and maritime routes. Within Mesopotamia, Uruk maintained vibrant internal trade with other emerging urban centers, smaller cities that mirrored its own layout and cultural influence. But the Uruk period also marked the dawn of long-distance trade on a truly international scale. One notable partner was Egypt during its Gurzean period. Archaeologists have uncovered Uruk ceramics in Egyptian sites dated to around 3500 BC, including pottery, cylinder seals, and lapis lazuli pendants, clearly evidence of cultural and economic exchange. Uruk's trade extended beyond Egypt to regions such as Syria, Anatolia, the Iranian Plateau, and the Indus Valley. Exported goods included ceramics, glass, grain, leather, fish, palm and vegetable oils, reed baskets and mats, and textiles. In return, Uruk imported a variety of goods from outside Mesopotamia, including copper, ivory, pearls, semi-precious stones, and carnelian beads from the Indus Valley civilization, gold, silver, and other precious metals from Egypt and Anatolia, timber from the Levant and Elam, which was later Persia, and lapis lazuli from ancient Afghanistan. No monetary system in the form of coinage existed at this point, and goods were exchanged for others considered of equal value. Uruk at its peak covered approximately 400 to 550 hectares, with an estimated population of around 50,000 in 2900 BC. Its architecture reflects the societal complexity, religious practices, and technological advancements of early Sumerian culture. Uruk's layout was characterized by a planned structure with distinct functional zones, a significant achievement in early urbanism. It was organized into two distinct precincts, the Iana district and the Anu district. These two precincts formed from the merger of two smaller Ubaid settlements talked of earlier. The Iana precinct was located at the center of the city. This was the primary religious and administrative center, dedicated to the goddess Inanna. It housed temples, ziggurats, and administrative buildings surrounded by courtyards and possibly workshops. Cuneiform tablets found here suggest these spaces housed scribes. Large columned halls, like the Great Hall in the Iana precinct, may have served as assembly or storage areas, reflecting Uruk's role as an economic hub. A beautiful and intriguing find discovered in the Iana precinct is the Walker vase, a 1-meter-tall alabaster vase dedicated to the goddess Inanna. It features carved reliefs in registers showing water and crops, animals, human offer-bearers, and a priest-king presenting gifts to Inanna, reflecting Sumerian cosmology and ritual. It was likely used as a votive offering or a ceremonial vessel. It was used in temple rituals to hold offerings like food, drink, or flowers for Inanna, symbolizing devotion and the economic role of Uruk's temples. Another remarkable find within the precinct was a square garden named the Great Courtyard among the numerous special buildings there. This garden was likely an orchard and had its own water supply. In one of the buildings, clay fragments with cylinder seal impressions were discovered in a square basin. The hypothesis came to be that these buildings, because of their particular dimensions, existed to hold gatherings of large groups of people who had something to do with administrative functions, perhaps opening up sealed goods. The most innovative building to be found in the precinct has to be the stone cone building on the western side. It stood on a terrace made of clay and had a foundation of stone walls. The walls contained colored stone cones, creating a mosaic shell. Inside the building, a water tank was found, with the floors being made of water-resistant pavement, suggesting a religious rite involving a large quantity of fluid. Post holes were found, possibly indicating standards for flagpoles, made with reed bundles. A remainder of such a bundle has been found. This one is dated from around 3500 BC and is bound with bronze bands. The mosaic cones return in their most impressive forms in the pillar hall in the center of the precinct. The cones were ceramic and were roughly 8 to 10 centimeters long and 1.2 to 1.8 centimeters thick, and were painted black, white, and red. The western district called Anu was situated in the western part. This older cultic area was dedicated to the sky god Anu. It was less extensive than the Eanna precinct, but equally significant. Anu seemed to contain the oldest structure excavated to date, remnants of a tripartite building containing a large central hall with rooms on the side wings, belonged to the Ubaid period, the end of the 5th millennium BC. Close to it are the remnants of a clay platform that is thought to form the base of a terrace that was raised up to 12 meters high. Another tripartite building, dating from around 3450 BC, stood on top of it with a height of 3.4 meters preserved today, having a ground plan of 385 square meters. The structure had whitewashed walls, with a central room containing podiums and a side room with cupboards. Several staircases have been found that led up to the roof. The structure is more commonly known as the White Temple. This temple stood approximately 40 feet tall and would have towered well above the flat plain of Uruk and been visible from a great distance, even over the defensive walls of the city. It is estimated that it would have taken 1,500 laborers working on average 10 hours per day for about 5 years to build the last major revetment of its massive underlying terrace. Surrounding the central precincts were residential areas, workshops and markets, though less is known about these due to limited excavation of non-elite areas. These complexes were central to Uruk's religious and political life, symbolizing the city's divine connection. Uruk's architectural innovations laid the foundation for Mesopotamian urban culture, influencing regions as far as Syria and Iran during the Uruk expansion. The ziggurat became a hallmark of later Mesopotamian architecture, seen in structures like the ziggurat of Ur. Uruk's emphasis on monumental public works and urban planning also prefigured architectural developments in other ancient civilizations, such as Egypt and the Indus Valley. Uruk was encircled by a massive mud brick wall, traditionally attributed to King Gilgamesh in later Sumerian texts. The wall stretched over 9 kilometers, with gates and towers serving both defensive and symbolic purposes. The wall's construction required significant labor, indicating centralized authority and resource management from the king and his priests. Canals connected to the Euphrates River facilitated irrigation, water supply and drainage, critical for sustaining the city's population and agriculture. These canals also influenced the city's layout, creating a network that integrated urban and rural areas. Houses in Uruk for the common people were typically single-story mud brick structures with flat roofs made with reed mats or wooden beams arranged around central courtyards. A standard house consisted of multiple rooms opening onto a courtyard, which served as a communal space for cooking and socializing. Rooms were small, with thick walls to insulate against heat. Elite houses were larger, with more rooms and sometimes decorative elements like painted plaster. The standard house design from Mesopotamia actually remains fairly consistent from the beginning of the Uruk period through to the Akkadian period. Uruk is rightfully remembered for its groundbreaking inventions, many of which still shape our everyday lives. First and foremost, the early evidence of the wheel dates to the Uruk period, in around 3500 BC, but not for transportation, as you may be thinking, but for pottery making. In fact, the earliest known physical evidence of a transport wheel comes from a bog in what is now Slovenia, where it likely spread from copper mining cultures in the Carpathian Mountains. The early Uruk pottery wheel was likely a simple, low platform mounted on a pivot or axle rotated manually. Unlike modern foot-powered wheels, It required the potter or an assistant to spin it. A lump of prepared clay was centered on the wheel's flat surface. The potter used hands or tools to mold the spinning clay, pulling it upward and outward to form vessels with smooth, symmetrical walls. Once shaped, the pottery was dried and fired in kilns, another Uruk innovation, to harden it for use. The iconic beveled rim bowl is a hallmark of this period. These coarse, conical vessels were likely used for ration distribution, possibly for workers in emerging urban centers. Their standardized form suggests centralized production to support a growing labor force. There were also spouted jars, used for pouring liquids, possibly in trade or ritual contexts, and fine ware, thin-walled vessels for elite or ceremonial use. Uruk pottery was generally less ornate than earlier Ubaid wares, prioritizing function over aesthetics. Decoration, when present, included simple incised patterns, applied bands, or painted geometric designs. The shift to plainer pottery reflects the focus on mass production for practical purposes, though finer wares for elites often retained more intricate designs. Another of the Sumerians' most influential inventions was the cylinder seal, dating as far back as 4400 BC. These weren't simply decorative objects, they were vital tools in the administrative machinery of early Mesopotamian society. Often associated with temple institutions, cylinder seals were used to monitor and record the movement and storage of goods like textiles and agricultural produce. In economic transactions, seal impressions served the same function as a modern signature or ID, ensuring the goods could be trusted even when exchanged between strangers. Sealed bevel rim bowls, for instance, likely tracked daily food rations given to workers, an early form of payroll management. By the mid-4th millennium BC, they had become central to a developing accounting system, one that laid the groundwork for written records. Cylinder seals were small, cylindrical objects, typically 2 to 5 centimeters long, made from materials like obsidian, hematite, and lapis lazuli for the elite. A hole through the center allowed them to be worn as jewelry or mounted on pins. Their surfaces were intricately engraved with scenes depicting deities, rulers, animals, rituals, agriculture, or warfare. When rolled across soft clay, they left a continuous and repeating impression, a mark of authenticity, authority, and identity. In a city like Uruk, these seals were essential for maintaining order and accountability. Their influence would spread across the Mesopotamian world, inspiring later iconography in art and seal-making for centuries to come. In essence, the cylinder seal was far more than a bureaucratic tool. It was a symbol of trust, identity, power, and culture. The people of Uruk were also the first in human history to turn spoken words into written symbols, marking the dawn of writing. The earliest form of cuneiform, known as proto-cuneiform, appeared in Uruk in around 3300 BC, evolving directly from the use of cylinder seals for record keeping. It consisted of pictographic symbols etched onto clay tablets to document administrative data such as grain quantities, livestock, textiles, or worker rations, drawn or pressed into puffy clay tablets, which were then fired in a heath or baked in the sun. About 440 personal names appear in the text, but interestingly, the named individuals are not kings or important people, but rather enslaved and foreign captives. Somewhat tragically, the list of individuals are not that different from those which summarize cattle, with detailed age and sex categories, except they include personal names, the first evidence we have of people having personal names. The Kish tablet, a small limestone tablet from the Middle Uruk period, and part of these proto-cuneiform texts feature possibly the oldest named person, Kushim. Kushim's name appears on a clay tablet, which is a receipt for barley shipments. This suggests he was a record keeper, potentially an accountant or administrator. Another Uruk period clay tablet that features names dating back to around 3100 BC includes the names of a slave owner, Gal-Sal, and their 2 slaves, a man, Enpapex, and a woman, Sukugur. This means that some of the oldest people and their names that we know of in history were slaves. This tablet was likely produced 1 or 2 generations after the Kushim tablet. There are about 60 symbols which represent numbers. These were circular shapes, impressed with a round stylus, and the accountants used at least 5 different counting systems depending on what was being counted. The most recognizable of these to us was the base 60 system, which is used in our clocks today. 1 minute equals 60 seconds, 1 hour equals 60 minutes, etc., and the 360-degree radius of our circles. The Sumerian accountants used base 60 to quantify all animals, humans, animal products, dried fish, tools and pots, and a modified base 60 to count grain products, cheeses, and fresh fish. Archaeological finds, like the tablets from Uruk's precinct, show over 5,000 proto-cuneiform signs. These were primarily economic records, with symbols for commodities, for example, a head of barley for grain, and numbers. Proto-cuneiform was not a written representation of the syntax of spoken language, but just to maintain records of the vast amount of production. To date, there are approximately 6,000 preserved texts of Proto-Cuneiform. While the vast majority of Proto-Cuneiform texts are administrative in nature, focusing on economic records and inventory, they also include other types of texts. Some of the oldest texts ever found in Proto-Cuneiform list the ingredients involved to brew 3 different varieties of beer. The idea of Proto-Cuneiform itself almost certainly evolved from the ancient use of clay tokens, as far back as 7,500 BC during the Neolithic era. People recorded information about their agricultural goods, including domestic animals and plants, in the form of small clay tokens. Clay tokens were used to store and communicate information about goods in ancient Mesopotamia. For example, cones might represent small measures of grain, spheres larger measures, and cylinders might represent sheep, serving as a universal system that transcended language barriers. They were made very simply. A small piece of clay was worked into one of about a dozen different shapes, and then perhaps incised with lines or dots, or embellished with pellets of clay. These were then sun-dried or baked in a hearth. The tokens ranged in size from 1 to 3 centimeters, and about 8,000 of them dated between 7,500 to 3,000 BC have been found so far. In a sense, Proto-Cuneiform is simply a technological shortcut instead of carrying around clay tokens. By the time of the appearance of fully fledged cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped in Latin, some 500 years after the introduction of Proto-Cuneiform, the written language has evolved to include the introduction of phonetic coding, symbols which represented sounds made by the speakers. The transition from Proto-Cuneiform to cuneiform reflects a shift from a rudimentary record-keeping tool to a sophisticated writing system capable of capturing complex language and ideas. This evolution supported the administration of empires, the preservation of literature, and the spread of knowledge across ancient civilizations, laying the foundations for written communication in the Near East. Also, as a more sophisticated form of writing, cuneiform allowed the earliest examples of literature, such as the Legend of Gilgamesh and various bragging stories about rulers. Among these, the Epic of Gilgamesh stands out as one of the earliest and most enduring works of literature, offering profound insights into human nature, mortality, and heroism. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets, primarily in Akkadian, with earlier Sumerian versions, is a cornerstone of world literature, dating back to around 2100 BC in its standards form, with roots in older Sumerian tales from around 2700 BC. Originating in Mesopotamia, it tells the story of Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, and his journey from arrogance to wisdom through friendship, adventure, and confronting mortality. Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 man, is a powerful and tyrannical king who rules Uruk. The gods create Enkidu, a wild man who lives among the animals, to challenge Gilgamesh and curb his excesses. Enkidu is civilized by Shamhat, a temple prostitute, and thereafter Enkidu becomes Gilgamesh's loyal companion through sexual initiation between he and Gilgamesh. They undertake adventures, including slaying Humbaba, the fearsome guardian of the cedar forest. After Gilgamesh refuses Inanna, the Lady of Heaven's proposal of marriage, Inanna, angered, seeks vengeance by convincing Anu, the sky god, to release the Bull of Heaven. They defeat the bull, but the gods, enraged by Gilgamesh and Enkidu's defiance, decide that one of them must die as punishment. Enkidu, a powerful friend and companion, is chosen to die from a fatal illness. Consumed by grief and fear of mortality, Gilgamesh embarks on a journey to find the secret of eternal life. Guided by the goddess Siduri and aided by the ferryman Ushanabi, Gilgamesh finds Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, who's been granted immortality by the gods after a challenging journey across the waters of death. Utnapishtim shares the story of the flood and offers Gilgamesh 2 chances at eternal life. One, by staying awake for 6 days and 7 nights. However, Gilgamesh fails this test and falls asleep. The second chance. Utnapishtim then tells Gilgamesh about a special plant that can restore youth, located at the bottom of the sea. Gilgamesh retrieves the plant, but while he's sleeping, a snake steals it and gains its own youth and immortality, so both chances for eternal life fail. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, where he reflects on his life and the importance of leaving a legacy through his deeds and the city he built, where he lies down on a couch of sighs and is never to rise again, indicating his passing due to the natural causes of old age. Beyond the Epic of Gilgamesh, Uruk's cuneiform tablets preserved other Sumerian poems that enriched the literary tradition. For example, the Enmerkar and the Lord Aratta celebrate Uruk's ingenuity through the mythical invention of writing, while Lugalbanda in the mountain cave and Lugalbanda and the Anzu bird glorify the heroic deeds of Gilgamesh's father. Additionally, poems like Inanna and Ebi and the Descent of Inanna highlight the divine power of Uruk's patron goddess, showcasing cuneiform's versatility in capturing myth, heroism, and religious devotion. Here is the translated excerpt from the poem of Lugalbanda and the Anzu bird to give you a sense of its poetic style and content. The Anzu bird descended, wings like thunder roar, its lion eyes ablaze, its voice a mountain's call. O Lugalbanda, kind one, who honored my young, speak your heart's desire. Let my wings bear it forth. Lugalbanda stood, heart steadfast, and spoke. Grant me speed like the storm, to race where none pursue. The Anzu, mighty, breathed power upon his frame, and like the wind he flew to Uruk's destined path. Sumerian poetry often uses parallelism, rich descriptions and formulaic phrases. The cuneiform tablets preserve this lyrical quality, though the original Sumerian would sound rhythmic and chant-like when performed. One topic we've touched on, but haven't yet explored in depth, and one that deserves special attention due to its profound influence on nearly every aspect of life in Uruk, is the city's mythology and religious beliefs. Their mythology and religious beliefs were foundational to their society, shaping daily life, governance, and architecture. Uru's mythology centered on a polytheistic pantheon of gods and goddesses who governed natural forces, human activities, and cosmic order. Key figures included Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. So important, she served as the patron saint for a period of approximately 4,000 years, from around 4000 BC to the rise of Islam in 622 AD. She became identified by the Akkadians and the Assyrians as the goddess Ishtar. She was central to the city's identity, with the Eanna precinct dedicated to her worship. Kings would legitimize their rule by ceremonially marrying themselves to the goddess. Ishtar was involved in almost every aspect of Mesopotamian life. As the goddess of love and sex, Mesopotamians would go to the temple of Ishtar to be married or to seek help with conceiving a child. Ishtar also had a role in the more violent side of Mesopotamian politics as the goddess of war. In particular, rulers would often call upon her for victory in battle. Myths like Inanna's descent to the underworld highlight her power and complexity. She was also seen as the bright star of the morning and evening, Venus, and identified with the Roman goddess. Inanna was often depicted as a young woman, frequently nude, symbolizing her role as a goddess of love and sexuality. She's also depicted with weapons and battle armor in her warrior aspect. Anu, the sky god, associated with the Anu precinct and the White Temple. He was a supreme deity, symbolizing divine authority. Anu was also listed as one of the 3 gods involved in creating the universe. As the supreme deity and ultimate authority figure, the Mesopotamians relied on Anu to maintain their physical and social world. Anu was said to contain the entire universe within himself, and he also controlled the laws by which the universe was governed. He was the father, not only of all the gods, but also of evil spirits and demons, most prominently the demoness Lamashtu, who preyed on infants. Anu was also the god of kings and of the yearly calendar. He was typically depicted in a headdress with horns, a sign of strength. These 2 were the most important gods to the people of Uruk, but other deities also hold significant roles in their lives, including Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, intelligence, mischief, healing, creation, and art. Enki was credited with making the first humans out of clay, and was believed to have created the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers out of his semen. His intelligent magic often included trickery to the benefit of the good of human race. Enki is portrayed as a loving and caring god who uses his wisdom to find the best solution in every situation. He was seen as compassionate in nature, with a desire to nurture humans. As the god of wisdom, Enki was often called upon by individuals who needed advice or by administrators and kings seeking the wisest course of action. Iconography depicts Enki as a bearded man wearing a horned cap and long robes as he ascended the mountain of the sunrise. Enlil. Enlil was primarily the Mesopotamian god of air, earth, and storms. However, he was also believed to have control over the fates, and his commands were unalterable. He was listed with Anu and Enki as one of the 3 gods involved in the creation of the universe. However, Mesopotamians viewed Enlil as a god of both destruction and creation, as they believed that this deity was primarily responsible for natural disasters and catastrophes. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enlil is responsible for sending the great flood that almost wipes out humanity. Enlil was typically depicted wearing a horned helmet or cap, often with multiple pairs of ox horns. Shamash. Shamash, also referred to as Utu, was the Mesopotamian god of the sun. Similar to the Greek god Apollo, it was believed that Shamash pulled the sun across the sky each day. Because of this, the people of Uruk believed that Shamash saw everything that happened on the ground, and so this god also became associated with truth and justice. Shamash was the twin brother of Inanna. As an agricultural society, the Mesopotamians were dependent on the sun for growing their crops. While this alone secured Shamash's place as an important deity, his role as a god of justice was of equal significance to the social and political structure of Mesopotamian culture. Shamash was credited with bringing the rule of law to humans, and was said to be the ultimate judge of both mortals and other Mesopotamian deities. Shamash was also involved with enforcing legal contracts, treaties, and business transactions. Some scholars believe that the Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest legal codes in human history, was meant to be a contract between King Hammurabi and the god Shamash. Shamash was depicted as an older man, with light emanating from his shoulders. Nanna. Nanna was the Mesopotamian god of the moon. Referred to as Sin in some texts, this god was one of the oldest deities in their pantheon. In addition to his primary role as a lunar deity, Nanna was believed to have the ability to see the future and to control the destinies of mortals. As a result, this god was heavily associated with magic and rituals. In particular, Nanna was linked to divination, astrology, and omens. As divination and observation of omens were central to their belief systems, and because religion was often integrated into Mesopotamian politics, Nanna also had influence over issuing verdicts in legal disputes and was often called upon to illuminate the truth. He was commonly depicted with a crescent moon as his main symbol. Local gods, nature spirits, and ancestral figures were also worshipped, often tied to agriculture and fertility. Uruk's religious beliefs were deeply animistic and anthropomorphic, viewing the world as animated by divine forces. The gods controlled the cosmos, and humanity's prosperity depended on pleasing them through rituals, offerings, and obedience. Temples were seen as the gods' earthly homes. A priest-king likely served as an intermediary between humans and gods, performing rituals to ensure divine favor. Daily and seasonal rituals involved offerings of food, animals, and goods, as seen in the Walker vases depiction of processions. Festivals, possibly tied to the harvest or Inanna's cult, were communal events. Moral behavior was tied to fulfilling social and religious duties. Beliefs about the afterlife were vague in the Uruk period, but later Sumerian texts suggest a shadowy underworld. In Sumerian belief, the underworld was a dark, shadowy realm where souls went after death, ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. It was not a place of punishment like later concepts of hell, but a gloomy, dusty domain where the dead lived in a dim existence, eating clay and drinking dust, unless offered libations by the living. Uruk's beliefs evolved from earlier Neolithic animism, when natural forces were personified. The fertile yet unpredictable Euphrates River shaped beliefs in gods controlling water and agriculture. Floods and harvests were seen as divine acts, necessitating rituals for stability. The transition to urban life amplified the role of organized religion to manage resources and social cohesion. Uruk's trade networks with regions like Iran and Syria introduced ideas from neighboring cultures, enriching its pantheon and rituals. For example, Inanna's cult may have parallels with other fertility goddesses. The rise of centralized authority in Uruk in around 3800 BC led to the formalized religion, with temples like those in the Eanna and Anu precincts serving as economic and spiritual hubs. The invention of cuneiform writing, about 3300 BC, enabled recording of religious practices. Religion permeated every aspect of life in Uruk, influencing social structure, economy, and daily activities. Myths likely explained natural phenomena, societal roles, and the city's divine favor, while written myths from Uruk itself are scarce due to the early development of cuneiform, which mostly only wrote down agricultural and trade down. Later Sumerian texts, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, suggest oral traditions of heroic and divine narratives were prominent and passed down generations. As Uruk grew to levels never seen before in the ancient world, it developed a complex bureaucratic system to manage its economy, religious activities, labor, and social order. At the helm was the En, a priest-king who blended religious and political authority. This figure, often depicted in long robes and a shepherd's cap, mediated between humans and gods, ensuring divine favor for Uruk's prosperity. He is shown undertaking rituals such as feeding sacred flocks, hunting lions with arrows and spears, and even punishing humans. Central to their role was the sacred marriage ritual, where the En symbolically married Inanna, Uruk's patron god of fertility and war, to secure agricultural and societal prosperity and legitimize rulership. The priest-king also oversaw sacred herds, symbolizing the city's wealth and divine protection. Supporting this leadership was a class of high priests, scribes, and elite officials who managed temple operations. The Eanna precinct, dedicated to Inanna, and the Anu precinct, honoring the sky god Anu, served as bureaucratic hubs. These temples controlled vast lands, labor, and resources, acting as redistribution centers for agricultural surpluses such as barley, dates, and beer, allocating rations to workers, priests, and elites. Elites received larger shares, while laborers got rations to maintain social hierarchies. Large-scale projects, such as building the city wall, ziggurats, and canals, required mobilizing labor. The bureaucracy assigned these tasks, along with providing rations, as evidenced by tablets listing worker groups. Scribes were also pivotal, using the early writing system proto-cuneiform to record transactions, inventories, and labor assignments on clay tablets. Excavations in the Anna precinct uncovered thousands of these tablets, revealing a specialized administrative class. Cylinder further standardized economic control. Standard weights and measures were also invented in the Uruk era, which ensured consistency in trade, taxation, and resource distribution. Stone or clay weights, often spherical or cylindrical, were used to measure goods like grain or metals. These weights followed standardized units, likely based on the base 60 sexagesimal system. Later Sumerian texts reference units like the mina, approximately 500 grams, likely rooted in Uruk's practices. Standardized vessels like beveled rim bowls measured grain or beer rations. Tablets record units like the silla, approximately 1 liter, for liquids and grains. Land measurements for fields used units like the iku, approximately 3,600 square meters, inferred from the later texts, but likely originating in Uru's irrigation management. Mathematics and accounting enabled Uruk to manage surplus, labor, and trade, while uniform weights and measures fostered trust in transactions, laying the groundwork for Mesopotamia's economic system. This integrated system of writing, sealing, and accounting was so effective that it shaped Mesopotamian administration for over 3,000 years, influencing regions from Sumer to the broader Near East. Like many great cities of antiquity, Uruk experienced a slow, steady decline that marked the end of its zenith. At its peak, around 2900 BC, during the early dynastic period, Uruk stood as one of the most sophisticated and populous cities in the world. However, by the end of the 4th millennium BC, its regional influence began to wane, initiating a prolonged and drawn-out descent from dominance. Despite its extraordinary contributions to civilization, Uruk could not escape the tides of change. After centuries of persistent warfare across Mesopotamia with local rival city-states such as Lagash and Amma over resources like water and land, Sargon of Akkad, the first emperor of the Akkadian Empire, conquered most of Uruk, absorbing it into his expanding realm. As a provincial capital within the empire, Uruk lost its political independence and much of its former prestige. But it wasn't just warfare which caused Uruk's gradual decline. Environmental degradation also played a crucial role. Around 2250 BC, a severe drought swept the region. Combined with the long-term effects of salinization caused by intensive irrigation, agricultural productivity plummeted. As salt built up in the soil, grain yields steadily declined. By 1700 BC, they had dropped by as much as 65%. The once thriving heartland between the Tigris and Euphrates slowly transformed into a sparsely populated land, much of it reduced to grazing pastures for nomadic pastoralists. After the Akkadian Empire fell in 2112 BC due to the invasion of the Gutians, an illiterate and nomadic mountain tribe who ruled Sumer and did not have a conducive rule for agriculture or record-keeping, the Gutians then caused a severe famine, and skyrocketing grain prices caused a revolt. Utahengel, a governor of Uruk, led the rebellion, driving the Gutian king Tirigan from the region. After defeating the Gutians, Utahengel established himself as the king of Sumer. In his victory, he described himself as the great man, king of Uruk, king of the 4 quarters of the world. Unfortunately, in the 7th year of the kingship, he tragically died in an accident when inspecting a dam, and was then succeeded by the governor of Ur-Nama, as the king of Sumer. He was thus the only king of the 5th dynasty of Uruk, together with the 3rd dynasty of Ur. This period saw Uruk come under control of the Uruk 3rd dynasty. Ur-Nama then began the reconquest of Sumeria, and under his son Shulgi, the Sumerians re-established their rule over much of the area previously controlled by the Akkadian Empire. The Neo-Sumerian period lasted for about 100 years. It is sometimes referred to as a renaissance in the Sumerian civilization, and in particular, the Old Sumerian language. It was certainly a period of intense activity, with the reconstruction of roads and cities and the re-establishment of order over the countryside. It was during this time that Ur-Nama began the construction of the Great Ziggurat of Ur, completed by his son Shulgi. Around 2004 BC, the 3rd Ur dynasty collapsed due to invasions, notably by the Elamites and the Amorites, who were seeking to expand their own influence and control in the region. The Elamites, allied with the prominent city of Susa, sacked both Ur and Uruk in 2004 BC, leading to the capture of the last Ur king, Ibisin, and the end of the dynasty. In 1787 BC, under the reign of Hammurabi, Uruk came under control of Babylon, along with other Mesopotamian cities. By building a powerful army and skillfully maneuvering between neighboring city-states, Hammurabi unified southern Mesopotamia under Babylonian control, making Babylon the dominant power in the region. However, texts from this period show Uruk's temples still functioned, maintaining religious and economic roles, but the city's prominence waned as Babylon and other cities rose. After the Babylonian Empire collapsed, due to a mix of internal strife and external invasion, the Kassites, an ancient people from the Zagros Mountains, rose to power. Their ascent came in the aftermath of the Hittites, an Indo-European civilization from Anatolia, who sacked Babylon in 1595 BC. The resulting instability created a power vacuum, which the Kassites exploited to take control of Babylonia, including the city of Uruk. Uruk's significance further diminished, though it retains some cultural and religious importance. Archaeological evidence suggests reduced urban activity with smaller populations and less monumental construction. In 911 BC, as part of their expansion, Uruk fell under Assyrian control. The city experienced periodic destruction and rebuilding, as Assyrian often suppressed southern Mesopotamian rebellions. Despite this, Uruk's religious institutions persisted, and it still remained a center for Sumerian and Akkadian scribal traditions. During the years 911 to 612 BC, under kings like Nebuchadnezzar II, Uruk saw a revival. The Eanna Temple was restored, and the city served as a religious and economic hub. Cuneiform texts from this period document temple activities, land management, and scholarly work, including astronomical observations. After Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC, Uruk became part of the Persian Empire. The city retained its religious significance, with temples continuing to operate. However, economic shifts and Persian administrative policies reduced its political importance. Following Alexander the Great's conquests, Uruk came under Seleucid control during the years 330 to 141 BC. The city adopted some Greek cultural elements, like Greek-style pottery, but its Mesopotamian identity persisted. The Eanna Temple remained active and cuneiform texts were still produced, though Greek became an administrative language. The Parthians, initially a small group of Iranian nomads, then came to rule Uruk through a combination of military conquest and political maneuvering, primarily under the leadership of King Mithridates I. Under this period, from 141 BC to 224 AD, Uruk's urban core shrank. Archaeological evidence shows a decline in monumental architecture, with parts of the city abandoned. The Eanna Temple ceased major operations, though smaller shrines persisted. Cuneiform writing gradually disappeared as Aramaic and other scripts dominated. The Sasanians, who already had a significant presence in Mesopotamia, ruled Uruk from 224 to 651 AD. But at this point, Uruk was a shadow of its former self, with settlement at the site ceasing during this time, eventually faded into relative obscurity. While the city was largely abandoned, a small group of Mandeans settled in Uruk during this period. The Mandeans are a monotheistic religious group with distinctive beliefs and rituals, most noticeably baptism as a central practice. They revere John the Baptist as their final and great prophet, while rejecting figures like Jesus, Abraham, and Moses. Their presence in Uruk is evidenced by the discovery of Mandaic incantation bowls found in the area. The arrival of Islamic forces in the 7th century marked the city's final chapter. Its last inhabitants dispersed, and the once great city was finally abandoned. No longer fed by the Euphrates, nor ruled by priest kings, Uruk, after a history spanning 5 millennia, was left to the dust and silence of the desert. For centuries, Uruk lay buried and forgotten beneath layers of sand and time, until the modern era brought it back into the light. Uruk was first visited by European travelers in the early 19th century, when the region was part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1849, British geologist and explorer William Kenneth Loftus conducted the first documented modern exploration of the site, then known as Walker. Loftus identified the ruins as potentially significant, noting large mounds and surface artifacts, but he initially misidentified the site as the biblical Erech, or a minor settlement. By the mid-19th century, scholars studying ancient texts, including the Bible and cuneiform inscriptions, began linking Walker to the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, known from Mesopotamian king lists and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 1850s by scholars like Henry Rawlinson helped confirm the site's identity. Systematic excavations began in 1912 to 1913 under the German Oriental Society led by Julius Jordan. These early digs uncovered parts of Uruk's massive city walls, traditionally attributed to King Gilgamesh, and the Inanna Precinct, a major religious complex dedicated to the goddess Inanna. Excavations resumed in the 1920s and continued intermittently from 1928 to 1939 under German archaeologists like Arnold Noldeck and Heinrich Lenzen. These efforts revealed the city's monumental architecture, including the ziggurat of the Inanna Precinct and the Anu ziggurat, as well as thousands of cuneiform tablets. Work was interrupted by World War II, but resumed in the 1950s up to the 1980s under German directors Heinrich Lenzen and later Hans Jordan. Excavations yielded iconic artifacts like the Walker Mask or Lady of Uruk, a life-sized stone face of a woman, now housed in the Iraq Museum. In 2006, Uruk was included as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognizing its global cultural significance. Uruk, one of the world's earliest urban centers, laying the foundation for civilization with its pioneering developments in writing, architecture, and governance. At its peak, from roughly 4000 to 2500 BC, Uruk thrived as a bustling hub of trade, culture, and innovation, exemplified by its monumental ziggurat, sophisticated cuneiform script, and the epic tales of Gilgamesh, reflecting its intellectual and political prowess. However, by the early 2nd millennium BC, Uruk began a gradual decline, driven by environmental challenges like salinization, shifting trade routes, and political instability from invasions and warfare. Despite its diminished prominence, Uruk's legacy endures in the archaeological record and its foundational contributions to urban life, literacy, and human culture, marking it as a cornerstone of civilization's evolution.